Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings another book review. So then guys, this week I am tackling another The High Republic book, and this is still in Phase 1, Wave 1, and this is the third of the Wave 1 books, and then I'll be moving on to Wave 2 in the future, and this is called Into the Dark, and it is by Claudia Gray. So a previous Claudia Gray novel that I've done a book review on was Master and Apprentice. It's set around, I think, 8 years before The Phantom Menace, and it's about Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Really enjoyed that. Make sure you go check out that review. I've also actually interviewed Claudia Gray on this very show as well. It was released around December 2020, so you should be able to find it if you're listening to this on YouTube or if on the feed of Comics in Motion. Really, really good conversation. Highly recommend it, and it doesn't give any spoilers for this book because it was a couple months before this book even came out. So lots of fun there. You may have heard me talk about other Claudia Gray books. She has done Leia, Princess of Alderaan, Lost Stars, Bloodline, I just mentioned Master and Apprentice, and Into the Dark. All of them are very, very good books. Princess Leia of Alderaan actually surprised me because that was the one I was least fussed about, but I read it just before having my interview with Claudia Gray, and it was genuinely fantastic. So all of Claudia Gray's books so far have been really, really good, and in short, Into the Dark is another one of those really, really good books. So some background information. As I said, this is involved in the High Republic era of Star Wars. So that's the multimedia project where a bunch of authors got together for Project Luminous, which was the nickname for this whole venture. And there's now comics, audio dramas, and books for all ages all culminating together, as well as I think there's a VR game as well for I think the PlayStation, and a few other like bits and pieces here and there that kind of culminate together to make this multimedia project so brilliant. So the main parts of it, at the moment at least, are the books and the comics. The comics I will be tackling on the normal Star Wars Comics and Canon show in the future. I just wanted to get some of the High Republic books done as a book review out of the way, just so you guys kind of had a bit more background information so you didn't have to read all the books. And for clarity with this, I'm going to go through the review being spoiler free, and then after that I will do some light spoilers and then potentially some heavy spoilers at the end, because this book has been out now for 7 months. So I'll figure that out as I kind of go. Sometimes I do book reviews in 2 tiers, which is just non-spoiler and then spoiler, but with Light of the Jedi and with Master and Apprentice, I think I did 3-tiered reviews because there was so much content to go through. I did no spoilers, a few light spoilers, and then heavier spoilers. So I haven't fully figured out which one of the two I'm going to be doing. I'll probably do 3 tiers, but I'll figure that out, and then you guys will know, because that's what the episode will follow. But to begin with, I'm going to do spoiler free. So here's some of the background information just to remind you guys about the High Republic. So the High Republic is split up into phases and waves. So currently, as of recording this in September, October 2021, there is one phase out and the second wave has been out. So for phase 1, wave 1, that was Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule, Into the Dark by Claudia Gray, obviously this one, and A Test of Courage by Justina Ireland. Now, I've done Light of the Dark and I've also done Test of Courage. Light of the Dark review was out March 2021 and Test of Courage review was out August 2021. In line with those were some comics. There was the High Republic main run of comics, and I think it was up to issue 5 or 6 that was the first phase, and then with the High Republic Adventures, it was the first 5 issues of that, which was also still in Phase 1, Wave 1. Then for Wave 2, which is not what this book is, but for clarity, it's the sort of sequel in this. Wave 2 is The Rising Storm by Cavan Scott, Out of the Shadows by Justina Ireland, and Race to Crash Point Tower by Daniel Jose Older. Now, Into the Dark and Out of the Shadows are both young adult novels. They're about 350 odd pages long. Then the Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm are air quotes adult novels. They're just slightly older readers. They're about 400 to 450 pages long. And then A Test of Courage and Race to Crash Point Tower, they are a junior novels. So that's more sort of middle grade kids. And they're around 200 pages, but because the pages are so much smaller than, say, the adult books and the young adult books. I would say that 200 pages of A Test of Courage or Race to Crashpoint Tower, the junior novels, are more equivalent to about 100 pages of one of the adult novels like Light of the Jedi. And also the junior novels also have some really, really cool illustrations in them. So make sure you don't write them off. Make sure you do go and check out my A Test of Courage book review I did a couple months back, because it really did surprise me. And then obviously along with those sort of 3 books that make up the second wave, then there's the next sort of 5 or 6 High Republic comics, the next 5 or 6 High Republic Adventures comics, and then there's also the Tempest Runner audio drama, which is about one of the Nile Tempest Runner leaders. I'll go more into that when I do my review of The Rising Storm, because she's in that a bit more, and I can kind of link to the Tempest Runner audio drama there. And in addition to that, there's also 2 mini-series. There's going to be Monster of Temple Peak and Trail of Shadows. So both of them are going to be mini-series that are going to be coming out during the second wave of Phase 1. And then in addition to that, there's going to be a Marchion Row mini-series, which is called Eye of the Storm. That's going to be in Wave 3. And, you know, there's lots of other sort of little bits and pieces. I'm sure we're going to get another audio drama at some point, but January 2022 is when the third wave of Phase 1 will be released. So that will be the first 3 waves of Phase 1. There's going to be 3 phases, so one would assume in total there are going to be 9 waves of this. So I'm going to be doing it for quite a while. It seems like a wave is approximately 6 months of release, and judging by what I can see online, that's very similar. And in Wave 2, to clarify, it's the next batch of High Republic and High Republic Adventures comics as well, and then it finishes off with the High Republic Adventures Annual 2021. So that's a little overview, and then just in brief for Wave 3, which is, as I said, is going to be out January 2022. You've got the adult novel, which is The Fallen Star, which is going to be written by Claudia Gray. We're going to have the young adult novel as Midnight Horizon by Daniel Jose Older, and then we're going to have the junior novel Mission to Disaster by Justina Ireland. So obviously they're swapping a lot of the authors around. You know, some of them are getting to do young adult books and then adult books. Some are getting to do comics and adult books. You know, it's quite a nice mix of things. So they're all managing to create different elements of story. The audio drama Tempest Runner was done by Cavan Scott, who is doing the High Republic comics as well, but also did the book The Rising Storm. So everyone is all entangled with each other, and it doesn't get any less complicated the more I say it. It's just quite easy to see when it's written down, which I'll try and make sure I write some show notes as well that kind of give a little bit more elaboration on what I'm saying, just so things are a little bit clearer. But that's the general background information. And as a reminder, the High Republic, these phases, so all of Phase 1 seems to be within a year or two of itself. And Phase 1, Wave 1, where this book is set, starts at 232 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is 200 years before the Phantom Menace. So that's the general idea. There's not very many characters that are alive. I think Jabba the Hutt's alive because he's about 600 at the time of his death. Yoda's alive because he's about 900 at the time of his death. Maz Kanata's about somewhere, but as of yet, recording this, what I've read, I haven't seen her pop up again. I'm fairly certain that her castle is popping up in a High Republic Adventures comic, so I'll tackle that eventually at some point. And then there's a couple of other sort of Jedi Masters who are a few hundred years old, and they'll be popping up here and there. I know Yaddle, I think, is in the next young adult book, which I'll be tackling. Well, I haven't even got it yet, so months down the line. But I think Yaddle's in that, which is the female Jedi Master who is the same species as Yoda. She is seen in The Phantom Menace. It just looks like Yoda with brown hair, in essence. She's appeared up in the odd couple of things, as the Darth Vader comics I tackled. She's in like one panel of that as a flashback. But it's that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the majority of the background information I'm going to be giving you then. So let's move on to the blurb of this book and continuing on with a spoiler-free review. So, not everyone who hears the call to adventure wants to answer it. Jedi Padawan Reath Silas loves adventure, reading about it, that is, not living it. Content to spend hours browsing the Jedi archives on Coruscant, Reath dreams of being one of the great scholars of the Jedi Order. But Reath's master, the well-respected and virtuous Jorah Malley, has other plans. She's taken a post at Starlight Beacon, the Republic's shining new outpost on the edge of known space. As her Padawan Reath must join her whether he likes the idea or not, and he most definitely does not. So Reath reluctantly boards the ship that will take him and a few other Jedi to the dedication of Starlight Beacon, where Master Jorah waits for him to start their new adventurous life on the frontier. But trouble in hyperspace leaves the ship and other nearby vessels stranded, with only an eerie abandoned space station reachable for shelter, and the secrets hidden there will not only bring Reath to the crossroads, but, if left unchecked, could plunge the entire galaxy into darkness. So a few things to unpack there. Obviously, the main thing is Starlight Beacon. That's something that's been spoken about in the press for the High Republic and whatnot. You've seen it in the High Republic comics a fair amount. It's basically just a really big space station that is meant to be something that helps make comms extend places, because back 200 years ago in the Star Wars universe, being able to communicate with someone via comm or audio, really, really far away in the galaxy was quite difficult, and they didn't always have the range they needed. So putting something like Starlight Beacon towards the near of the outer rim means that core planets could send communications to Starlight, and then Starlight could then almost bounce those communications to other worlds nearby. It was also a good place that has lots of medical bays and things. It also had Jedi outposts and things on there, so it means that if there's any nearby systems that are having an emergency or something along those lines, you can just send out Jedi or aid in some ways to go there, rather than having to send them from the core worlds like on Coruscant and things, where it could take a lot longer for someone to be able to reach them. And in this book, there is the Great Disaster, which is referenced in the blurb. Now, this is not a spoiler, or rather, I do not classify it as a spoiler, because, it's been 8 or 9 months now since the High Republic has been out, and everyone generally knows this piece of information, and it's basically spoken about on the blurbs of other books that have come out. But in essence, the Great Disaster was just that a ship was going through hyperspace, and then the Nile got in the way of a ship while it was going through hyperspace by them using, I believe, the paths, which is a special technology they have. That then caused the ship to try and turn in hyperspace, which caused it to all splitter apart in hyperspace, and then pieces of this ship flew off in loads of different directions. A lot of them were going towards planets. The whole of the Light of the Jedi book is basically all about the Jedi trying to deal with this great disaster happening. When these pieces of space debris fly out, they're going at near light speed. So if they collide with something, they do a huge amount of damage. If they hit a small moon, it can destroy crops. If they hit planets and things, it can wipe out millions of people of the population, if not the whole planet. It's a very, very big deal, and that's basically the whole plot of Light of the Jedi. So this book, as well as A Test of Courage, kind of runs somewhat parallel to the Light of the Jedi book. And the way this all sort of starts, there's like a prologue which gives you a bit of information of Reith and his master as well, Jor O'Malley. But then the main bit of the story is, as the blurb confirmed, Reith basically heads out with loads of other people to go to Starlight Beacon for its grand unveiling and opening. The great hyperspace disaster occurs, and the Chancellor turns off hyperspace lanes to try and prevent any of these things from happening while they try and sort out the problem that was shown to them in Light of the Jedi. And so when that happens, loads of travellers were just stranded. And the ship that Reith was on is one of those ships that is stranded, and they have to go to this nearby sort of space station that no one really seems to know much about. So that's the general premise of it, and a lot of the themes that come about is almost duty, responsibility, and doing the right thing, as well as kind of finding your way in the universe. Because this is a young adult book, one of the themes that comes into it is coming of age, finding yourself, trying to work out what purpose you have in the universe, and maybe not sticking to things you're solely comfortable with. Because even in that blurb, it literally says that Reith just wants to be a Jedi archivist, basically. He wants to be, in essence, a Jedi librarian, which there's no problem with that, but he's so young and he's already made his mind up. His master's kind of like, you need to go out and experience more of the universe. You can't know for certain what you want to do if you've only experienced a small amount of things that the universe has to offer. And so it kind of explores that, and Jor O'Malley has another Padawan before Reith Silas, who's now a Jedi Knight, and this Jedi is called Des Ryden. And, you get to see the dynamic between Reith and Des in this as well, because Des is one of the people who goes with Reith, and Des is much more of an adventurer. He couldn't think of anything worse than being stuck as a Jedi archivist. So you've got these two people who are both trained up by the same master, who have completely different outlooks on how to go ahead with life and what they kind of want to do with themselves, which is a very interesting thing as well. I think that's kind of subtly talking about, when you've got parents and you can have two children, raise them almost the same, and they can still be completely opposite people. Those sort of ideas kind of, I think, come into play a little bit in this. So it's really interesting in that regard. And, I do like young adult books. Most of Claudia Gray's books I've read have been young adult. It's this one, Princess Leia of Alderaan, and Lost Stars. They're all young adult books. I think that Master and Apprentice is an air quotes normal adult novel, as is Bloodline. So, there's a few. After Fallen Stars comes out, I think it'll be even again. But it also means that the main characters are primarily the ones of sort of teenagers. I believe Reith is about 17 years old, which isn't that much different of how old Obi-Wan was in the Master and Apprentice book, because in the film The Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan is actually around 25 years old, which isn't necessarily that old for a Padawan. It kind of just depends. We see things in the Clone Wars where Padawans get promoted really quickly because they do this big war and these battles, and then they kind of count like Jedi trials would, but also the Jedi and the Republic just needed more generals and they were running out of Jedi. So, lots of mess around the prequel era of how long it takes people to actually become a Jedi Knight. But also when I spoke about the book A Test of Courage, that has a character in it called Venestra Rowe, who has appeared in other High Republic stuff as well. And she's a Jedi Knight at the age of 17. I think she actually became Jedi Knight at the age of 16. In the book I read, she was 17. But that's like a very, very rare case. I think that's like one of the earliest anyone's ever become a Jedi Knight in like ages. So generally speaking, you become a Padawan from like your early teens up to sort of your mid-20s, thereabouts. So you're doing it for usually minimum of a decade before you actually can become a fully fledged Jedi Knight. So there's a lot of learning you have to go through. There's a lot of things that one must do. It's not just lightsaber forms, but also knowledge of the Force, confidence in yourself, all kinds of different elements. And then you're meant to do your Jedi trials. And when you do the Jedi trials and you pass them, then you become a Jedi Knight. And then generally speaking, once you then take on a Padawan and then that Padawan becomes a Jedi Knight, usually you would then become a Master. But there are lots of exceptions to the rule, either people who don't become a Master from that, or there's lots of exceptions for that rule. Some people who actually don't become Masters when their Padawans defeat the trials and become a Jedi Knight. But then there's also people who've never had a Padawan and they can become a Master from doing other things. So it's not like a specific rule set, it's just a general ideas for you guys of kind of background information on the Jedi. So looping back to the review element of things, I believe that this book is as good as A Test of Courage, I'd say. It's probably not quite as good as Light of the Jedi, but I think that the air quotes adult books, because they're the main pillars of each wave of the High Republic, they are the ones that have got, the most amount of, pages at the very least. But, the more characters, more perspectives, you get a lot of the antagonist perspective as well as the protagonist perspective, and it normally circles around main events that affect the galaxy. So although Into the Dark is really good and Test of Courage is really good, obviously Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm are the two heavy hitters for me for these books thus far. Now, Into the Dark, what I find, is actually a really, really good companion novel for the comics. So the High Republic comics, just called the High Republic comics, by Cavan Scott, which are on, as of recording this, issue 9, I think, they actually are about the Drengir a fair amount. Like there's one or two plot lines that are about the Drengir. Now the Drengir are actually in this book a fair amount as well. I don't want to get into the depths of it without going into my spoilery review, but the Drengir are much more present in this book than the Nihil are, as an example, because the Nihil are the primary antagonists in the books and things, but in the comics it's been the Drengir. And also in addition, there's a crew in this book from a ship called the Vessel, and they actually appear in the High Republic Adventures comics by Daniel Jose Older. So there's lots of connections to the comics for this book actually, which is really good. And I would recommend this if people are reading the comics and then want more information on the Drengir or the crew of the Vessel or anything like that. This is a good place to start. So the kind of really almost 2-sentence answer is, Light of the Jedi, that's for the main plot and the Nihil. Into the Dark is for the slightly more side plots, the comics and the Drengir. So, as I said, it's still a really good read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the characters are brilliant, and Claudia Gray always does a really, really good job with her sort of teenage characters and things. She balances it very well of not only having issues that one would have to deal with by being a Jedi in a galaxy like this with all the stuff going on, but also with all the other things that come along with being a young adult or a teenager. And more connecting with the comics as well, one of the main characters in this is Orla Jareni. Now, she is a female Jedi, and she actually appears once again in the High Republic comics in number 8, I think it is, issue number 8. And so there are lots of characters that are connecting in other areas that may not seem as apparent now. And with the upcoming book Fallen Star, which is Claudia Gray's adult novel for the High Republic, which is going to be Phase 1, Wave 3, so January 2022, because she's writing that, then I presume that this book specifically Into the Dark will link quite heavily into Fallen Star. Like some of the characters will probably be in it and that sort of thing, because Claudia Gray loves writing new characters for books and then connecting them to other things. It makes it very rewarding as a reader if you read all of Claudia Gray's Star Wars works, because there's always planets that are mentioned or drinks or characters or little references here and there that all kind of connect together. So where Claudia Gray's being at the helm of the next wave of the High Republic and she's going to be the one pushing the main story, then this book I think is going to become even more important. There's other supporting characters as well. There's Master Comac Vitus, Vitus, and he appears in the comics as well. But then I mentioned that the crew of the vessel, I'm not going to get into the details of them here, but I will just say that there's Leox Gyasi, there's Affy Hollow, and then there's Geode. Geode is my personal favourite. And they appear once again in the High Republic Adventures comics. So you actually get to see what they look like, which I very much enjoyed being able to see them. I mean, on the cover of Into the Dark, it's got Reath Silas, the main sort of character in Padawan, with his lightsaber ignited, and behind him seems to be Affy Hollow. From the description you get of her in the book, and also what I've seen of her in the comics, it seems to be that same person, in case anyone was wondering while looking at the book cover. Now, I'd say the pacing of this book is good. I wasn't quite as grabbed as I was with Light of the Jedi or Test of Courage initially. Once I got about halfway through the book, then I really couldn't put it down. It's not that it took necessarily too long to get going. I just think with Light of the Jedi, where it's firing on all cylinders so quickly, the first third of the book is like a massive action scene, and then you get a bit of calm in the middle, and then it goes quite mental at the end again. Whereas this book is almost the opposite in a sense. So the middle is kind of where things start to go, and then the end is a big finish. So this is much more of a build, whereas the Light of the Jedi was more of like a bam, trial by fire at the start, then a bit of calm, then once again excited. So I think I struggled a little bit with that due to the pacing, but that isn't, as I said, because of this book, that was because of myself. When I read A Test of Courage, it was different because Test of Courage is 200 small pages, so the amount of time it took to get a half-ish way through Into the Dark was the amount of time it took to finish A Test of Courage. And A Test of Courage is much more of a smaller story that only has a few characters with it, whereas this one has Reath Silas, who's the main character who you follow around the most, I'd say. But then you do also get, some chapters from Des, some chapters from Orla, Jareni, some chapters from Comac Vitus, and then there are other characters as well that you get a bit of information on too, including the crew of the vessel, which is really cool. But I would say this is once again just a really, really enjoyable read. I did enjoy it. I thought it was cracking. I'm very interested to see how this compares to the other YA novel that is out, which is in Phase 1, Wave 2. That's by Justina Ireland. That's Out of the Shadows. It's quite nice how a lot of the books kind of connect to each other, because, this is Into the Dark, then there's Out of the Shadows. And then Daniel Jose Older's book, which is the YA one for Wave 3, that's going to be called Midnight Horizon. So they're all very much to do with darkness, nighttime, that sort of thing, which I quite like that. So it kind of makes it easier to read if you're just going to pick up the YA books or you're just going to pick up these other books. They connect them together, which is quite nice. And as I said earlier on, the Nile aren't featured as heavily in this book. They are mentioned and things, but they are not the main part of the story at all. It is definitely more central around the Drengir and also Reath Silas sort of dealing on a mission by himself and trying to figure out what he wants to do with himself in the universe, along with other people being different influences. Like he can see that Comac Vitus, he is much more of a knowledge-based Jedi, so Reath looks up to him a little bit, whereas Orla Jareni is more of a sort of wayfinder, so she kind of just makes her own mind up. It's been a very recent thing for her in the book that I'll get into a bit later, but she kind of has that element of it. So they're the two kind of different perspectives of what a Jedi could be, or at least two of the different perspectives. There could be numerous different ones. And then you've obviously got Des, who kind of bounces off because Des is basically the opposite of Reath. And so there's all these sort of layers to it which work really well, and it's a very interesting look, both character-wise and also how it affects the wider galaxy. So I think that's more or less it for the time being on the non-spoilery front. I think otherwise I'm going to end up getting into more information on things that would potentially spoil stuff. So this is your warning now of spoiler stuff. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. I'm going to explain the plot a little bit more. I'm going to go into the characters a little bit more. And then by the end, I may give a bit more information. I imagine I will, just because, as I said, this book has been out at the time of release for about 8 or nearly 9 months. So anyone who would have read it would have ample time. But this is your spoiler warning. Very minor spoilers. You'll still be able to read the book and enjoy it a great, great amount. I'm not going to ruin the ending or anything, but yeah, you've been warned. So moving on. So obviously when I read the blurb out, it kind of hinted to what the story was going to be, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth in this. So Reath Silas, the whole sort of prologue thing is him with Jorah Malley, who is his master, and you just kind of get to see their dynamic, and then her breaking the news to him that they're going to be going to Starlight Beacon, him obviously not very happy about it, and then them organising to go off there. So Reath goes into a ship called the Vessel, along with Orla Jareni and Master Comac Vitus, or Vitus, I keep pronouncing his name wrong, who knows, Vitus. And then the crew of the vessel, as I said, are Leox Gyasi, who is the pilot. He's a guy, he's quite cool. Then you've got Affy Hollow, Holo, who is kind of teenage age, very similar to Reith Silas, and she's the co-pilot. And then you've got Geode, who is a Vintian. So Leox and Afi, I believe, are both human, whereas Geode is a Vintian. So a Vintian is just like a rock person. So there's like a running joke throughout the book, and it's done so well. He's one of my favorite characters, where people who don't already know Geode think he's just a rock. And they're like, why is there a rock in the bridge sat in one of the seats up front with the pilot and the co-pilot? Why do they keep talking to Geode? And then characters occasionally notice, wait a minute, wasn't Geode in the other room? And they look across and see Geode in the room that they're in now. And they're like, did that rock just move? And it's that sort of thing. And the humour is done very well with Geode, and I really appreciate it. And it does make for quite a cool character. So that's all I'm going to say about Geode. But Leox and Afi, they're an interesting dynamic, Afi being the younger one, so Leox is kind of like a mentor in some ways. Afi's a member of the mining guild, I believe it is as well, so she's got like a mother figure as well, who she speaks about, and she sort of learns some things about as the book goes on as well, which makes it intriguing. And then Des Ryden goes with them, so you've got Reith Silas, Des Ryden, Orla Jareni, Comac Vetus, Leox Gyasi, Afi Holo, and Geode. And they all travel together. They're meant to be going to Starlight Beacon, and then the hyperspace disaster basically happens, and so all the hyperspace lanes get cut off, so they are then stranded in essence and have to stop by this space station that they find. And there's also other ships around them as well that get stuck around the same place, and it's confirmed that in essence, the sun, I think it was, in the nearby area was going to let off some really bad solar flares or something along those lines. So all the ships in the nearby area will have to dock onto the space station and then kind of stay there for as long as it takes. I think most of them didn't have the fuel to get to the next place, or that they had to wait for the solar flare and whatever to happen, and then they've got a short window to leave. It's that sort of thing. So kind of a good plot device to make all these characters go in this one place. And so then for several chapters, it's got lots of different characters kind of exploring the space station. They find some information about this thing and that thing, and there are a lot of conversations going on trying to work out, what happened with the hyperspace disaster, while the Jedi are also trying to calm down all of the civilians that have docked to the station. And I think there's some pirates there as well who are like trying to kind of strong arm everyone, but the Jedi are having none of it and having to separate people and that sort of thing. So the Jedi and Reith are trying to kind of learning to be peacekeepers in certain ways and trying to make sure people don't fight each other, while also, trying to look around and work out what's going on, because this space station has got a huge amount of plant life on it, which is semi-unusual. There's like these droids that go around like clipping hedges and all these sort of other things as well that don't like to be disturbed, and if you damage a flower then they may attack you. It's like lots of little things like that, so something just seems a little bit off. And so the people go exploring around, and Comac Vitus and Orla Jareni are kind of pair off together as two of the most senior members of the Jedi. They both have quite good knowledge of different things. And one note about Orla as well is that she actually has a white lightsaber. So people may have seen it in other content. In fact, in the Ahsoka book that's set just after the Clone Wars, it explains that she got her white lightsabers by cleansing a Sith crystal. In brief, you get a normal lightsaber crystal. If you're a Sith or a very, very dark side user, you can then basically feed all your negative energy and whatnot into a crystal, which will make it in pain, which makes it bleed, which turns it red. And then a Jedi can then do the opposite, putting like good thoughts and nice things and whatever, and a lot of power into the crystal, and it turns it from red into white. And then that's cleansing. And Orla actually found this old Sith weapon that had a kyber crystal in, and she cleansed that, so she has white lightsabers, which I thought was quite a cool thing. Like, you can still have white lightsabers cleansed without actually having the Sith, because, a lot of people should remember that in the prequels they mentioned that the Sith haven't been about for like 1,000 years. So in essence, about 100 years before Yoda was born, thereabouts was when the last Sith were kind of seen. So you've got this like 1,000 years where the Jedi are just vaguely ruling, in a sense, along with the Republic and etc. So obviously, as the canon expands, once we finish with the High Republic era, I imagine they'll do another push for 400 years before that. So then it will be some time period then, and then I imagine again they'll do another one 400 years before that, and then that will start off a lot of the Jedi and Sith wars and those sort of things, probably the tail end, and then they'll probably do another jump back to kind of do more of the origin stuff. That's my guess over the next decade or two for Star Wars, because obviously Legends delved into that sort of stuff a lot, but at the moment they're just focusing on the High Republic, which I am really enjoying. So you've got those two going off together, and they find some strange things. And as I said, one of the antagonists are the Drengir. Now, this is the light spoiler, but anyone who sees any press releases about this book will know this, but the Drengir basically are awakened, in a sense, from this book. It explains how you find out, not that far into the book, it's less than like halfway, where there's just lots of plant life and things, and something seems a bit peculiar, and then a couple of things get moved and whatnot, and then someone goes missing, and stuff starts to happen that is just not really adding up. And Orla and Comac find these sort of statues, these totems that seem to be emanating dark energy. So they aren't really keen on those things. Then after a while, once the commotion and things around the space station has calmed down, the Jedi then move these totem things out back to the Order because they want to study them. And then they realize when they do that, that's actually bad because these dark side totem things were actually keeping something in rather than creating something bad. And then they go back and they discover that the totems were in part holding back the Drengir, and then that's kind of how the Drengir get unleashed into the galaxy in some ways because they're no longer held in that space station. It does then confirm that there's other places the Drengir are at and whatnot, and the comics and certain other content does go more into the Drengir. This isn't just a Drengir podcast, but it's kind of how they got awakened and how people deal with them, and it's quite interesting seeing a lot of Jedi fighting the Drengir as well as certain other characters fighting them as well and seeing how destructive they can be, because I found in the High Republic comics there is like a whole arc or two about the Drengir, but although they were interesting and it showed how it kind of affected one of the Jedi Padawans, I believe it was Keith Trennis who gets affected and her master Skier who gets affected as well by the Drengir. Although that is cool, it doesn't give a huge amount of backstory because it comes from this book. And in fact, in the comics, it shows you the space station that I'm referring to is actually shown in this book. So you get to see it in the High Republic Adventures, what it really looks like, which is really cool. Now, one element of this book, which is spoiler-ish in some ways, but not necessarily to this book. There is a character that is mentioned in this book quite a lot that is also mentioned in The Light of the Jedi and that dies in Light of the Jedi. So this is your warning. If you don't want to know who that is, if you haven't read The Light of the Jedi or anything like that, this is your warning because from here it's going to get a bit more spoilery in certain ways. But basically, Reath Silas's master, Jorah Malley, she is in Light of the Jedi. She is actually one of the Jedi who dies during the book. I can't remember if she dies at the start or more towards the end because there's two sort of main action set pieces in that book. I'm pretty sure it's the second one. But she's very, very close to Skier, who was Keith Trennis's master, and Skier is a Trandoshan Jedi. He's in the High Republic comics quite a lot. And because of her death, it made Skier go down like a darker path, which he kind of deals with in the High Republic comics, which I'll delve into when I tackle those comics in like a few months' time and things. But Reath Silas, when he goes to this space station and then they, kind of see the totems and stuff, and then they help a few people and whatnot, and then they go back to the Jedi Temple, taking back the totems and whatnot. I believe it's then that Reath then finds out that Jorah Malley is no longer, in the physical form. She's passed away. She's become one with the Force. And then it's him kind of trying to deal with that. He feels very lost and very alone, and this book tackles loss quite well, and like grief and trying to work out how to kind of deal with those things. And then when he has to go back to the space station along with basically the same crew to try and return the totems, then it's him sort of trying to deal with it even more because he wants to, do her proud, but he doesn't feel like he's ready yet. And so I really like that events of the other books have a direct impact into these books as well, the young adult books and the junior novels and things, but they all seem to tackle very similar kind of themes, and it's about loss and about grief and, dealing with mentors and guardians and people you look up to, and sometimes when they're not around, or sometimes they're not the person that you thought they were, which is another element of this book. Not for Reath and Jorah, that's a different kind of element of the story, but it's good being able to see that and being able to teach children about, well, not just children, but teach people, these sorts of lessons and whatnot. And I think that the Jorah Malley thing is very tactful because when I read Light of the Jedi, which I read first, I then read this one, and then it was like, oh yeah, Reath Silas and Jorah Malley, and I was like, wait a minute, Jorah Malley? I was like, I'm pretty certain that she is killed in Light of the Jedi. And then you kind of see whereabouts as you're reading this book, and the whole disaster happens, the hyperspace disaster, and then the Nile attack, and you hear about that, the events from Light of the Jedi, obviously after the fact, in Into the Dark. When it gets to a certain point in the book, you're thinking, Reath's going to find out about what happened to Jorah, and it is a lot, and it's a chapter or two of him dealing with that, which I really like. And then from there, that's kind of the moment in the book that I found it really elevated, because for me as well, I was kind of waiting for it to happen. I don't want a character to die, but when you know it's going to happen, you're kind of like, oh, I want it to happen so you can see how it impacts other characters. And you can see that Reath definitely was not ready for that. And I think I gave a bit of information about Reath at the start, but to compare him, I read him almost like a Hermione sort of character. I think Hermione's probably a bit more outgoing than Reath is, but, he's he works very, very hard. He doesn't have just that natural gift of the Force like, say, Anakin did. He really had to work at it, and he's a very hard worker. He also has more of a cerebral approach to the Force, so he's very much about, the logic-based things and the rationale, less so than the spiritual, and less so than an instinctual thing. So when he goes into something, he tries to think and plan things rather than kind of going with his gut or going with what the Force is kind of trying to hint at him as well. And it's him kind of trying to deal with trying to use your instincts while also using your head, not heavily relying on just one or just the other. And there's another character, which is Leox Gyasi, and he is much more of a character that goes with his gut feeling. He's an instinctual character. And him and Reith have a couple of interactions, which are quite interesting because, whereas Reith is very much like we do it like this, we do it like that, whereas Leox is like, nah, something doesn't feel right. I feel like my gut is telling me something else. We need to kind of look into this more. There's something beneath the surface that we're not quite seeing, which works very well as a dynamic as well. And you've also got Affie Hollow and then a couple of other characters in it. There's a young girl called Nan, as an Nan. She's a young girl. I think she's a year or so younger than Reith, and she takes a big interest in him and wants to know about the Jedi and stuff because, most people in the galaxy don't really interact with the Jedi, don't know much about them, especially as you go further and further into the Outer Rim and to the less explored regions of the universe. Then you get people who haven't experienced them. They want to know, are you monks? Are you like this? And I always find it quite funny when sex is mentioned in Star Wars, and Claudia Gray tactfully handled it in Master and Apprentice when there's one of my favourite characters, Rael Averross, who was Dooku's apprentice before Qui-Gon Jinn was, so he's kind of like a mentor character to Qui-Gon Jinn in certain ways. Having him, and him with sex and things is quite interesting. This Into the Dark is a YA book, so they don't talk about sex a huge amount, but it does actually get mentioned, which is also quite funny as well. Especially when you've got like a younger Jedi who's like a teenager, with hormones and all sorts of other things, and they have certain thoughts and whatnot. And then when sex does get mentioned and the character gets really, embarrassed and they blush and those sort of things, compared to a character like Leox, who is, he smokes a spice stick, I think it is. So like really, from what I understand, spice can be turned into all kinds of different things. Like it's used as medicine. I think it's almost like an opiate, like a heroin sort of thing. But he seems to smoke a spice stick. The vibe I get is that's kind of like cannabis, like marijuana, that sort of thing. When he is smoking it and how he talks about it, and his whole demeanor is linked with that of a stereotypical individual who would potentially smoke cannabis and those sort of things. And having a character like him, he will do basically drugs. He basically has sex. He goes with his gut feeling. He's a pilot. He kind of does what he wants. He's a bit of a maverick. But he's a really nice person, Leox. Having him compared to Reith, who obviously, they can't do drugs, they can't have sex, or they're really not meant to. They're not meant to form certain attachments to people. So Claudia Gray's characters in this book work really, really well. I think that's probably the strongest point of this book, because although Light of the Jedi is excellent, I think the plot of Light of the Jedi is absolutely phenomenal, and the characters are really, really, really cool. Like I love Bel Zettifar and Loden Greatstorm and Marchion Ro and things, but the characters there are different because there's so much going on and there's so many big events that's happening. It is more so about the story, and then the characters are kind of second. Whereas I found with Into the Dark, it was kind of the opposite, where the characters are front and center and their interactions and their connections, whilst the plot was slightly more secondary. Because as I go through this, trying to do the spoiler-free review and trying to do a review without as many spoilers before I get into slightly more spoiler territory, there's not as much plot to say. If you just explained the plot to someone, it would probably only be a paragraph or two. Whereas Like the Jedi would probably be a bit more than that. However, when you go into the details of the plot, there are little details here and there, but it's much more about the characters interacting with each other than the plot. So I do really enjoy that element of it. And as I said, these characters are popping up elsewhere, so it is worth picking up this book if you haven't already. And with that element sort of in mind, we'll kind of come to the tail end of the review, where this is going to be more spoilery. As I said, I'm going to try not to ruin the book for you, but as I said, the plot, it's fairly standard in a way. It's fairly linear. You can kind of get the gist. And if you've read any other content, it's probably already been confirmed what happens in this book anyway. But even if you know the plot, it's still a really, really fun ride. So as I said, they get the totems, they move them out, and then the Drengir kind of get unleashed, and then they go back there, and then they put the totems back, and then try and hold off the Drengir. But it shows that the Drengir have already, in a sense, escaped, or they've been awakened, so they can kind of go out and spread their seed across the galaxy. And they are quite terrifying, the Drengir. They refer to humans as, or people, just any sentient being, as meat, and they just eat them, and you can like slice them in half, and then they'll just grow back. They're quite terrifying. Fire seems to work well with them, but they have this horrible thing they do to people, which is kind of like brainwashing it in a way. It's kind of like incepting them. In the comics, you see some very gruesome imagery of it where they've got these like vines and roots and they go into characters like noses and mouths, and then their eyes like roll back and they're kind of stuck there while the Drengir are just like sucking away their life force, and they're in this horrible like trance kind of state. It is, hard to read or hard to think about. It's one of those things that I always find like when you get mind control or having like life energy sucked away or things like that. I mean, it's kind of like vampirism in certain ways, because obviously old school vampires could both hypnotize individuals with the gaze, and they also drank the blood, which is in essence, the life essence of someone. But the Drengir, they're kind of like almost zombie plants, but they have some sort of hive mind that connects them together. And when you read this book, you think they're going to be like the main villains, or at least maybe the Nile are going to be the main villains, and then the Drengir are going to slowly rise beneath them, and then maybe the Drengir will be the proper threat, and then the Nile has to team up with the Jedi to fight the Drengir. But that doesn't seem to be the case at all. It seems like by the end of phase 2, due to the comics and whatnot, that the Drengir are getting stamped out quite a lot, and there's another being that comes into play in the Rising Storm, which could be another antagonist. I don't want to say anything else about that until I get to the review of the Rising Storm, but there seem to be other elements and things that are coming into play. Like, no one really knows where the High Republic is going. Obviously the writers do, but we as individuals don't. And interestingly enough, the totems there were actually Sith totems, and they were there to try and hold back the Drengir. So centuries before, maybe even thousands of years prior, the Sith had an interaction with the Drengir and couldn't quite really beat them either. So the Sith had to trap them. And so obviously the Jedi go in and say, God, there's loads of these Sith things that are really bad. We should, look into these and see what we can do about them. And then they end up causing the problem that the Sith actually try to prevent, which just goes to show that even though the Sith are, inherently seen as evil, and from what we can see in the movies and things generally are, they still fear things. There's still beings out there that can cause them fear and worry that they need to get rid of, that they can't just simply destroy. So it was interesting having that layer of things, and you kind of see some of the characters, the Jedi are very much, very anti, it's very black and white, even though Obi-Wan's famous line in Revenge of the Sith is, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Obviously, that is an absolute in itself, which kind of somewhat shows the Jedi have lost their way in some manner. And I think that the point of the High Republic is to show the fall of the Jedi. It's going to be showing where they got to the point where a Sith Lord could somehow become the Chancellor of the Republic right under their noses. They couldn't really sense anything, and basically undermined the entirety of the Jedi and exterminated all of them. And the High Republic is kind of trying to show the Jedi's change from being a bit more liberal, a bit more okay with wearing lavish clothing and being able to have all these cool lightsabers and being able to have more jokes, but then also being able to have, physical things with other individuals, which gets tackled in a later book as well. And so they become much more dogmatic and much less willing to bend, and a lot more rigid with their ideologies. And I think that the Drengir and the Nile and whatever else is coming are going to push the Jedi into that sort of box that we know them from in the prequels before their inevitable destruction. So there are flashbacks in this as well. So Comac Vitus and Orla Jireni, they are connected not only because they have certain interests in things, but they also went on a mission together like years ago. And I believe it was when they were both Padawans. And you get one chapter of that every 6 or 7 chapters-ish, maybe every 10 chapters, I think. So I think you get, from memory, I believe you get 5 or 6 chapters of their flashback. And it is really interesting seeing, it's basically a rescue mission, and in certain elements of it goes wrong. And that's kind of what set both Comac and Orla on the paths that they're on at the time of this book. And I like that as well. I think Claudia Gray's done that on a few other books. I know with Master and Apprentice she did it. I'm fairly certain she did it in Bloodline. I can't remember if she did it in Lost Stars. I don't think she did, and I don't think she did in Leia, Princess of Alderaan. But she does have this very good way of doing it, which you've got this linear story going forward, and then every now and then you've got a flashback chapter to give more information on characters. So I really, really liked that, and I said I really like the characters in this. They're all very interesting in their own ways, and the story is cool, if not a bit simple, but it works very well, especially with the connected content that comes from that. But I think I'm pretty much at the end here. I think if I added anything further, that it would spoil the book more so than the kind of light spoilers I've been giving you just here. I would say to read it. I think where one can, try and read as much High Republic stuff as possible. I wouldn't say this is necessarily an essential read. I would probably say it's a more important read than A Test of Courage, although A Test of Courage is a lot easier to read and a lot more easygoing. But it kind of depends what you want out of the High Republic. I'm trying to consume all the content, so I'm trying to read all the books. I've read all the comics thus far. There's some miniseries coming out. I think there's 3 or 4 High Republic miniseries that are coming out, and then there's also the audio drama. And I'm sure there's going to be some other stuff as well. There's the VR game as well, which I'm not going to get into because I don't have, £400+ spare to buy VR goggles and the 2 Star Wars games that come with it. And it's only like 1 or 2 missions on one of the Star Wars games that's due with the High Republic. And I've watched some YouTube videos on it, so I don't really need to go into further detail. It would be fun if I got given loads of money, but I couldn't really warrant spending that kind of money on that thing. But I would say the main books to read, like the essentials, is Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm. They're the top ones I think you guys should read. Then I'd say secondary would probably be the High Republic comics, both the High Republic, printed by Marvel, and also the High Republic Adventures, printed by IDW. Those really surprised me, the High Republic Adventure comics, how good they are. It's hard because both comic runs are really good, but I think the art style in the High Republic Adventures is absolutely incredible. It's probably some of my favourite Star Wars comic art style. It's slightly more cartoony in some ways, but it's detailed cartoony. There's a lot of shading and that sort of thing in it, which I really, really enjoy. So I say tier-wise here, you've got Light of the Jedi and Rising Storm, then the High Republic and the High Republic Adventures comics, then I'd say Into the Dark. Then below that, I then say A Test of Courage and Tempest Runner. Tempest Runner, the audio drama, and A Test of Courage are really good, but A Test of Courage for me seems like basically just giving information on Vanestra Rowe and Imri Kantaros, I think his name is. Those 2 kind of characters that do pop up once again in the comics. And Vanestra Rowe is a very interesting character in herself. I tackled her early on in this review, and obviously I gave her even more information on the Test of Courage book review as well, but they aren't, when I see them pop up in the other Star Wars content, you don't have to have read A Test of Courage to really understand what's going on with them. Whenever Vanestra seems to get mentioned, someone mentions she's a child prodigy. In fact, I'm pretty certain in this book, Into the Dark, it gets mentioned, and that's what made me want to read A Test of Courage, because I wanted more information on Vanestra Rowe. So there's plenty to read. You can kind of pick and choose whatever you want, and Into the Dark is definitely worth it, especially if you're reading with the comics and if you want more information on the Drengir. And I think the crew of the vessel, Geode, Leox, and Affi are all going to pop up again in the future. So it's that sort of element, and you get some good interaction with people asking Reith what it's like to be a Jedi. So I quite like getting the everyman in a sense, because us as viewers, obviously, when you consume Star Wars content, the Jedi are everywhere. They are, apart from in Solo and Rogue One, they're the main parts of the Skywalker saga. It's always about lightsabers or the Force or Jedi or Sith or those sorts of things, and I really enjoy that element of it. But you get kind of a skewed perspective because there's only, at points, 10,000 Jedi in the galaxy. So you're just thinking, well, if there's this many Jedi in the galaxy, the amount of billions and trillions of people, Coruscant, I think, has 1 trillion people on it at the time of Phantom Menace. Well, a trillion is 1,000 billion. Well, on Earth, we've only got about 8 billion people. So if you think that it's really about 125 times more people on Coruscant than there are on Earth alone. And Coruscant, I think, to my knowledge, is the most densely populated planet in the galaxy. But then you've got like Corellia, that has like 3 billion people. You've got Naboo, that has quite a lot of people as well. I can't remember the numbers of how many people live on all these places, but you've got Eriadu, there's quite a few people on there, which is where Tarkin is from. You've also got, Tatooine, there's not as many people because it's a desert place. And obviously the same with Jakku. And Hoth and other sort of deserted places that haven't either got very much life on or have got a little bit of life on. But you do have quite a few systems that have got lots of people there, including in the Outer Rim and in the Mid Rim and then the core worlds. Obviously the core worlds have got the most amount of people, but due to that amount of people, even if we just say there are like 2 trillion people in the galaxy as an example, compared to like 10,000 Jedi, I mean, that's like millions and millions times more. So for every 1 Jedi, you've got some like 100 million civilians. In a way, that's kind of the thing. And if you think about how many people that is comparatively, that would be in the whole of the United States of America, which has about 330 million people, there would probably be about 3 Jedi. So imagine in the whole of the United States, there's 3 people that are Jedi. Now, what are the chances that people in America have all met people? Even if you got 3 people in America to spend their entire lives going out and meeting people, they wouldn't be able to meet everyone. It's just impossible. And that is on a much smaller scale. So that's the kind of size that you're thinking about and looking at. So as I said, it is good when you get people who haven't met Jedi ask these questions that maybe us as viewers would want to hear. But yeah, that's really my review of Into the Dark. It's a great book, a lot of fun. Especially recommend it for anyone if you've got teenagers who want to read these books. The YA books are really, really good. You know, the Light of the Jedi and the Rising Storm, I think they are excellent, but they are heavy both in subject matter, but also very wordy. They're a lot to read. They would be suitable, I'd say, for the majority of teenagers, but there are some pretty intense stuff in there. Whereas the YA books, I think you get enough from the main pillar stories, so you understand about the great disaster that happened. The Rising Storm focuses about the Republic Fair, and I have not yet read Out of the Shadows, but I presume they're going to talk about the Republic Fair in there, because that's the main event that's happening in the second wave of the first phase and stuff. But yeah, I think Into the Dark, it tactfully talks about them if people haven't picked up the Light of the Jedi, but I would still recommend Light of the Jedi first. But please tell me, guys, what you thought of these books. Tell me if you've read them and how you think they'll impact. Do you think the Drengir are going to come back more? Have you guys been reading the comics? How do you think they compare? Like, I'm really interested. Start a conversation. You know, you can comment on any of the social media places that I post. You can send me an email. You can contact me anywhere, really, and just ask my opinion on stuff, or I'd like to hear yours. It's these books, obviously, I'm the one who's reading them all, and, you know, Megan hears about them a bit, and I see other Star Wars YouTubers and content creators talking about them somewhat, but certain people who aren't in the realm of Star Wars to the same weight that I am, in the same way, trying to consume all the content, it would be interesting hearing what you guys sort of think about these things. And then for my next book review, which probably won't be out for another month or so, because as I said, these book reviews do take a little while to do, that'll be on the Rising Storm, which is still in the first phase, because we're still in the first phase as of recording this, but it'll be the second wave. So that will be about the Republic Fair. It's written by Cavan Scott, who's been doing the High Republic comics, and he did the audio drama Tempest Runner as well, which is worth a listen if you've got Audible or something like that. And then once I've done the Rising Storm, I'll probably do, you know, Race to Crashpoint Tower, and then Out of the Shadows, and then by the time I end up doing those book reviews, it will be past January 2022, and then that will mean that the first phase and the third wave will be coming out, which is, you know, Claudia Gray's The Fallen Star, Daniel Jose Older's young adult book, Midnight Horizon, and then Justina Ireland's Mission to Disaster, which is the junior novel. So lots of cool things to read, lots of cool things to get my teeth into, as well as we've got the Eye of the Storm 2-part, like mini-series about the origin story of Marchion Ro, or Marchion Ro, depending how you want to pronounce it. And then there's also the Monster of Temple Peak, which is about Ty Yorick, who's in The Rising Storm, as like an origin story of her. And then there's also Trail of Shadows, which is a mini-series by Daniel Jose Older. And there's also a manga out, which is The Edge of Balance by Justina Ireland. I haven't actually read those yet. I probably will at some point. And then there's also just a couple of other like minor things here and there. But, you know, what I've just mentioned are going to be the sort of the main bits you want to check out. But aside from that, guys, I think that's it. You know, make sure you check out the video I did with myself and Megan when we spoke with Alex and Molly of Star Wars Explained. You can check a YouTube video version of that out, which is, full video for the whole conversation, or on this feed, if you're listening on the feed of Comics in Motion via podcast app. It was released like 2 weeks before the date of this one, so you should be able to scroll back by like 5 or so episodes of the shows on the feed, and then you'll see I uploaded it there as well, and it's on the feed of Genuine Chit-Chat too. In addition to that, you know, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/genuine chit-chat. I often release these book reviews on there a few days early, because I normally get them done slightly earlier than I get done the normal comic ones. And there's also, you know, bonus content on there. There's afterthoughts episodes I do with Megan. There's full unsplit episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat. There's lots of different things you can get on there. So if you feel like supporting the show, it's only there's £1 a month, and you get access to lots of cool stuff, like hours of additional content and an audio feed that you can put in your podcast app of choice. So that's going to be it for me, guys. Thank you as always for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you listening, especially all the way up to the end here. And as always, guys, I'll speak to you next week, and may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.